Good evening. Good evening. This is, I'm just checking something here. Right there. This is the Freudian Spaceship group. This is the fourth session, and we're going to have a smaller session this evening. A few people are very, very busy. One of the people is just started teacher training and is very busy doing that. And other people are quite busy doing various bits and pieces, and there's various other meetings and stuff that people have got to get to. So we're having a quieter session today, and the session's aim today is kind of a review. It's kind of just to sort of see where we're at. As I say, this is the fourth session. So yeah, this is a kind of review and a checking in with other stuff that's that we've been doing, but a kind of review of what we've been up to so far, and a conversation about where we think we're at. So John and Rob and Helen are all sitting in the lobby here, but what I'm going to do first is share a couple of bits that people have been sort of sharing through the group. So the first thing I'm going to share is a little bit of video, which I have not seen yet. So I'm hoping the person who shared this, it means it's not a terrible piece of video. So anyway, let's just get Rob and Helen and everyone in. So hello when you come around, that's kind of fine. But yeah, we're just going to watch this little bit of YouTube first. Because as I say, this was shared by one of the group members. So let's just start with that.
Hi Jill, how are you doing these days?
I'm okay. I stay at home. It's almost always.
What are you doing there with your old mobile?
Trying to download content tracing apps. Elderly persons with weak lungs belong to the high risk group, so I thought I'd better get this thing.
It won't work. Your mobile is too old and you're a puppet.
Okay then. I also suspect these apps constitute just another feature of the societies of control. Remember, physics and me talking about electronic tagging and imagining a world in which access to specific places was granted or refused by a central computer.
Yeah, often thought about it during the last days and weeks. I also looked up again what you wrote about viruses.
It's only a few lines, mostly in 1,000 plateaus. For example, we form a rhizome with our viruses, or rather, our viruses cause us to form a rhizome with other animals.
The famous rhizome. Unfortunately, this was quoted so often that one has a hard time understanding what it actually means.
Well, it belongs to the things that Felix and I took from our discussion of the modern life sciences, in particular molecular biology. In the 1970s, the great biologist François Jacob talked about genetic fragments that might be transferred by viruses, about transversal connections between species, subverting the model of the tree and of creation, and about the abominable couplings between microorganisms, animals, and humans.
You also read, we oppose epidemic to filiation, contagion to heredity, populating by contagion to sexual reproduction.
And we continue bands, human or animal, proliferate by contagion. battlefields and catastrophes. You see, all of this is not very peaceful because epidemics combine and confront rather different things. For example, a human being, an animal, and a bacterium, a virus, a molecule, a microorganism. The rhizome is a biological and sociological phenomenon, but it is also a technological reality. Today, contact tracing apps are part and parcel of the corona rhizome, which also means it includes mobiles, radio towers, computers,
Oh,
algorithms, and so on and so forth.
still, I'm missing something.
Uh, you mean physicians and politicians? They are also part of it. Rhizomes can be rather extended and complex.
Well, that's precisely not my point. And I'm also not referring to the dark side of these assemblages. You do account for it, for example, when you highlight the fact that in an epidemic, nature operates against itself. You even say, we evolve and die more from our polymorphous and rhizomatic flus than from hereditary diseases.
So, what do you miss?
A reflection about the conditions under which rhizomes can emerge at all, or an idea about how the encounters they are based upon became possible. In the case of the coronavirus, there has to be at least the virus itself, animals and human beings, but then there has to be a market where they get attached and a city where this rhizome can be extended, including streets, bikes, cars, planes, and so on.
Sure, eventually can be integrated, or rather, integrating world capitalism in order to have all of this together.
And then I wonder if you could do something against this.
It's not easy. One of the first steps might be what I mentioned in the beginning, staying at home. By this simple measure, we protect ourselves against contagion, but also against universal communication and the control technology of the present age. I always was convinced that the crucial movements were intensive voyages, voyages in place. Did you know? Eventually, the nomad is one who does not depart, does not want to depart, who clings to the smooth space.
Hmm. Well, I somehow do like to move and to travel, but okay for now. I'm going home and will think about what you said.
And I'm going to get me a new mobile.
Okay. That was a little contribution from one of the other participants in the group who's not here this evening. They sent their apologies. Also, I'm not quite sure what to make of that at the moment. Where was that? Let me just. Is that no? It's now chucked me straight onto some. Okay, because we were talking about that, it's immediately struck. I've got some COVID-19 advert on my YouTube. Anyway, that was from Betty. I've got a little bit of text from Morrigan, and that I'm going to read out later. But first of all, next, as it were, we'll let's all say hi and say how we're doing this week. And as I say, the session today is a kind of review session, thinking about what we've been up to so far and where we're at. But first of all, let's just go around and say hi and how you've been and what you're up to and stuff. So let's say hello, John. How are you? How's you been? You seem to be a bit better this week, you were saying.
Yes, I'm in a place that has Wi-Fi at least. Yeah. Hopefully, I'm one step closer to getting my house, so I'm a lot happier. My wife's just come out of hospital with a hip operation, so that bit's done as well. So yeah, things are moving upwards.
And Rob, how are you?
Yeah, not so bad, thank you. Tired as always. I say that every week, but tired. New term and everything.
Yes, it's evening. It's that time. It's that kind of time when lots of people are knackered. As I say, we've got Betty and Sam are busy, and Chris is in the middle of doing a presentation for tomorrow, and Gabby's got some other meeting. Yeah, so people are tired and busy. How was your week though? Was it okay? Have you been back at work and getting on with things?
Yeah, back at work, and we got new children starting because I work in a kindergarten, so we got new little tiny ones. So it takes a lot of our energy but it's lovely. It's really nice.
And how are you, Helen? How's your week been?
Can you hear me all right? Yeah. I think it's been quite slow, I think. I've been resting lots. I played a couple of games of tennis. Saw my social worker. Did a bit of shopping. Went for a run this morning. Feeling a bit stronger tonight. Kind of being a bit more assertive in my approach to the world. So hopefully that will continue, which I know it will, but it's kind of like a bit of an ongoing battle.
Okay, that sounds good. It sounds like it. And how about you, James? How have you been this week?
Yeah, fine, thanks, Matt. I had a pretty quiet week. I missed last week, and I did the reading for that actually, so I was a bit disappointed about that. But hopefully, I'm looking forward to just. It's nice to have something to do in the evenings, to be honest, because especially some sort of free university stuff or something similar. So yeah, looking forward to this week, and that's about it, really.
Good. Actually, speaking of that, free university stuff, let's we've got the Free University's got its first face-to-face event. Let me put this up. It's got our first face-to-face event this coming Sunday. And you can probably see this here. I wonder if I can zoom in for you. There we go. Yeah, there we go. Sunday the 19th of September, 2 to 4 p.m. in Brighton, as it happens, obviously. If you're not in Brighton, that's kind of a bit difficult. And it's going to be the launch of our new book, sort of imprint thing. And this particular book is called The Questioning of Intelligence. And we're also just going to have a little chat about the launch of the imprint itself, which is called Fubtext. So yeah, this Sunday, the Free University Brighton has its first face-to-face event. I think public face-to-face event. I think since the beginning of the lockdown, actually. I don't think we've actually had a public event since then. So yeah, if you're watching this and you're into the Free University Brighton, maybe get along to that on Sunday. Although it's first come, first served, and there's a limited amount of seats. I think there's only 40 seats because of social distancing. So before we sort of turn to thinking about what we've been up to, there's a little bit of text from Morrigan that she sent over to me earlier. I'm not sure whether she intends this to go into the kind of shared document. Anyway, I'll just read that. Wakes early, leaves early, arrives early, and then there's a small sliver of silence and coffee and breakfast. The day will fill with hubbub, white noise, people speaking the unspeakable because they cannot be lambs. Some years ago, an American friend told me about the knock man, the guy who administers the initial stun in the slaughterhouse. He's often an old vet. Back then, Vietnam, these days, Iraq or Afghanistan. They don't talk to no one and no one talks to them. Death and its aftermath are crashingly silent. Einstürzend and Neuerbarten, and so it goes. Right, so as we know, the idea of the group was that we were beginning to kind of think about some of the stuff that we were talking about in the conversations around Freudian schizoanalysis and how we might turn those into words, writing, text, publications, something along those kind of lines. So far, how do you feel like that has been going as a process? I'm going to go around and get everyone's kind of thoughts a little bit on this one. So relax your voice muscles and have a contribution, and just generally your thoughts so far on our conversations. We've had 3 conversations so far. First of all, about Fuchs and group dynamics. And then we had a conversation about Do Easy from William Burroughs. And then we had a bit of a conversation about friendship and militancy, joyful militancy, friendship and revolution, from I think it's the Bergman and Montgomery. So we've had those 3 talks with 3 conversations, 3 chats about, as I say, group dynamics, friendship, and this kind of flow process of Do Easy, and we've done and there's been some interesting stuff. I'm not sure whether I would I'll just here's a kind of shared text we have at the moment that is beginning to sort of move along. There's various bits there, and when I looked at this today, I was interested. There was definitely bits kicking along there, and I was thinking, all right, okay, and that it's moving. There are different voices, and I can hear kind of different elements there, and there's some notes being put down. But I think we've got the next step to take now about what we do next, I think, and how we kind of if we're going to produce something, if we're going to push towards working with our own text, how we do that next. So those are the things that are on my mind about how this works. I'm going to, in a slightly different order, I'll start with Rob. We can work back round. I'll go Rob, Helen, James, and then John. And so, yeah, your thoughts, your comments, kind of sort of what are you thinking about at the moment? The rest of us will mute in between, by the way, as well. So we'll do a round, and then we can sort of open up our conversation. So yeah, Rob.
Okay, let me think. It seems like a bunch of threads that I'm interested in are sort of coming together a bit. Which are like something around, the group dynamic is one of the threads, and how a group might function, or how a group might produce something which couldn't have been produced otherwise if it was just the individual. And then the other thread would be thinking about like subjectivity, and how, like, for example, with the Fuchs piece, about how subjectivity might not be something that is just sort of in my own head internally, but something that is produced in a relation with other things. And the other, when I say other things, I think something important for me, which came up a few weeks ago, is that might not be humans. That could be, we could open that out to other life, or other bodies, or whatever you want to call them. And another thing that came up for me, which I think I read in the collective writing piece, was something about like trying to move beyond like a sort of traditional seminar format, where you just sort of, one person comments and then the next person comments, and it feels kind of like linear, and how you could go beyond that, and maybe that would be something more sort of along the lines of like poetics or something like that. Gosh, yeah, I don't know. Those are a bunch of random things I've just chucked out there.
That's good. Let's chuck some bits out there. Everyone feel the same. Don't you don't have to kind of. We're not having fully formed thoughts here. We're kind of working in public. So yeah, just chuck it out. Helen, you're next, and then I'll come to James. Your thoughts so far on how we're going, what we've been talking about, just what's up in your mind at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Rob, for that. I don't know, like after last week, I've just been taking it easy. and I noticed that in my garden, like these flowers just suddenly popped up after being dead, and I was like, that is just miraculous. Like it's like one morning they're all dead, and then I go out in the afternoon and they're all popping up again. They're all popped up again, and I just thought to myself, my thought was, if I'd spent the whole morning outside, I would have seen those flowers move and get back to their full glory. And I was like, I just don't want to ever like miss that opportunity. So I've just been spending the week looking at my cat and just kind of observing her and looking at the flowers on the table. And I think like what it is kind of come back to a natural pace of life. Like, you know, I think processes happen much more slowly, and I don't want to miss them. I want to capture them, what I've been doing is I wrote a couple of poems about a dying bumblebee, which I had a vision of, and one about a couple of seagulls, and I really kind of felt the love that what the man seagull had for the female seagull, and it really helped me kind of understand humans more, looking at the seagulls in that way. And I've been reading a lot of Ted Hughes, so he's kind of helping me on my journey towards that. And I kind of been lying in bed and making sure that I don't wake up until I absolutely have to and I have no other choice. I absolutely do not want to be pushed out of bed. And to me, that's kind of an act of protest in some ways to the kind of energy that is kind of that I'm kind of resisting in some ways. And in terms of coming up with like some writing and things like that, I do find that people I like to keep people around me rather than kind of in front of me or kind of coming at me. Because if they're kind of coming at me, then I kind of don't have my own sort of way of coming up with my own words and my own language and the way that I feel about things. So I'm sort of kind of keeping them out here a bit.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned this in the first episode, didn't we? In the first kind of like session we did, we talked a little bit there about that kind of diversity in ways in which different people are going to do things and learn, in particular, kind of learn using different kind of techniques, and so I think that's important. James, how are you, and how do you feel like writing processes? Have you felt like you've been able to engage in writing or doing anything like that, thinking about particular questions at the moment? How do you feel like the process is going?
I haven't done any writing for a while. I did enjoy sort of the sort of format of this. It's difficult to sort of it's nice that this sort of sessions in a group, so discussing the Fawkes piece, or is it the Revolution and Friendship piece? I did a bit of reading on that, and it's nice to sort of hear what other people have got to say and bounce ideas off each other. I've done a bit of writing a few essays for the Free University, going back to that again for a few of the different tutors. Some I think some I did better than in others, but I haven't done a lot of writing for quite a while now, especially sort of through lockdown, even though I was sort of participating in a few sort of Zoom seminars. But I'll be interested in sort of giving it a try, even if it's only sort of a short piece, really. It's definitely a good skill to keep in practice, and I think that's what I've got to say on that, really.
That's okay, James. That's good. And John, how about you? How are you up to at the moment, and what are your thoughts at the moment?
Well, I don't know if it's a bit of a reflective learner, so I attack the piece and try and understand it, and then I actually get much more information from the group, and that's when I go away and think about it and have thoughts and try and sort of put it into some sort of order. So most of my thinking is done after, on a Tuesday or a Wednesday rather than the Sunday or the Monday. So I can't contribute as much, but what I am doing is taking it in. So for the next time round, I might be able to contribute.
let's talk a little bit about ourselves. How much do people write? I mean, who here writes at all? Much. So Helen, I know you write a bit of poetry and you write some stuff in the text. Who else writes? I mean, James, you said you haven't been writing much recently. John, would that be the same? You've not been writing much recently?
I'm doing lots of learning, so lots of courses and stuff. So most of my time is spent learning, doing sort of solution-focused therapy and that sort of stuff. So I'm doing a lot of learning and writing with that rather than unique learning, copying to understand rather than unique writing.
How about you, Rob? Do you? I mean, where in the course of your everyday life, where does writing come into it?
In everyday life, I always have a notebook, and I'm always scribbling notes about stuff I've read, but also I have to take notes at work, which are quite sort of fast hand about how the children are interacting and playing. And
this is for reviews or something, for like doing.
Yeah, so observation and assessment. But actually, interestingly, we're sort of experimenting with a slightly more poetic style of observation where we're not pretending to be like a neutral observer, but we're sort of including ourselves in the narrative, and we're experimenting with like different perspectives. So writing it to the child, for example. So that's been quite fun. So, yeah, but my writing's quite sporadic and all over the place. So quite nice to pull some, I don't know, trying to pull some bits together in some way.
And people, how has your experience of trying to write outside of the norm, outside of like the everyday work space? What kind of experiences have we had of that? I mean, are they all, James, you said you wrote a little bit earlier for some other tutors. What was your experience when you were doing that? How did that feel? How did you engage with that? What was the kind of process?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I did. It was when I first started at the Free University, so I hadn't done sort of academic study for a while, although I had done some sort of A levels and higher education, getting back into writing essays. I did a sociology essay for Luke, which he passed me on that. He said, and I was quite pleased that because I've been out of writing for not doing any sort of writing in my own spare time, like creative writing or anything like that. I did a philosophy essay for Jacob, which he said was a good effort, but I think I found, because I've never studied philosophy before, as I got GCSE sociology. I found it, although I found philosophy very interesting, I found that a little bit more challenging. I did a creative writing course as well with someone at the Free University, which it's nice doing that more sort of like Helen says, she wrote some poetry. I suppose it's more sort of creative and something that you might like to do as a hobby or, just as a pleasure, really. Although I haven't been doing that much of that kind of stuff lately. I have been attending sort of some online Zoom lectures, but just listening and taking some notes and that kind of thing, which I suppose is writing in a way, but note taking. But yeah,
that is definitely writing, James. It's just, I mean, yourself, Helen. Apart from poetry, what else are you writing at the moment? How else are you engaging with writing? What's your current experience of it? Is it in work, or is it in just for your own creative work?
I'm constantly setting like assertive reminders for myself to set boundaries on the world, really. So I'm having to constantly put them in my phone, and when I write them down, it really reaffirms my actions. To like it really puts a kind of bottom line to a decision that I've made, and I'm able to move on and be absolutely sure that I'm not going to go back on my decision.
So something to do with an affirmation. So you think I mean, why is that? Do you think does the writing like put it in black and white, as we used to say? You know, does it sort of put it down there in black and white so you kind of can't see it? Is there something to do with that when you in terms of that role of it, the written down affirmation?
Well, because I hear voices. I've heard voices for 25 years, and my voice has become a really integral part to who I am. And when I because I can't hear my voice very loudly, because they kind of medicated me and kind of made it really, really quiet. So when I write things down, it's the kind of loudest kind of way that I can kind of assert myself. And it's actually my voice is probably the strongest thing that I can believe in the kind of situation that I'm in, really. So I really, really trust my own voice, and so I put so much trust into my own voice, it's able to kind of manifest things. And yeah, it's kind of on a journey, so it kind of builds on every time I put trust into it. It builds and builds and builds. And yeah, I mean, in terms of memory, it's not like storing any sort of memory. It's kind of like the create process for me is like, once I've done something, then it just automatically remembers what I've done, and then the next time I attempt it, it builds on that. It never forgets that. So I'm constantly kind of building on something that's remembering for me, which for some reason I seem to be, I don't know what that is, that thing that's remembering it, but it's not being lost. So yeah.
I mean, that's kind of, there's a sort of, I mean, there's a long, and for those of you who were around when we were looking at the Phaedrus in the Plato and Deleuze course, there's a lot of discussion around the relationship to memory that writing has. So one of the arguments that comes up in Plato is that writing is actually going to make us forget, because we're going to rely upon it, as it were, as our memory, and so we're going to stop having what we might think of as like learning things by heart, or taking things in. And I think there's an element of that that's kind of interesting phenomenologically in terms of our experience. I mean, do other people feel like writing can make things more firm, more solid? Do they feel like things become, because I mean, this would be my sort of my kind of sort of sense is that when we produce a text, even if it's not ourselves, there's something more solid in the text than there is in our conversation. And I'm not sure that's necessarily a good or a right way of doing it, but there's this kind of solidity there, a kind of an affirmation of something there that is distinct from a conversational form. Does that sound like one of the reasons we might want to write, or the reasons we might want to produce something? Is that part of the dynamic? John, I can see you kind of hesitating to come in.
Yeah, I mean, I have a book always on the go. The last thing I wrote in it was the 9 open-minded people you need in your life, and I did that this morning, and I've come back to it 3 or 4 times because it helps me refocus to see if that was true, or did it need developing, or did I fully believe it? Because it's too much information to take on straight away. So by having it written down in a specific place means I know where it is, and so I can refer back to it.
That's that's a kind of rule or a thesis. There's these 9 different characters you're saying, and you're trying to test out and see whether they occur.
Well, this came from one of my courses.
Yeah.
And it interests me that you need 9 types of people. Now, do you need 10? Do you need 7? Do I need all 9? These are questions I can now ask myself during the day until the next thing comes. And so, I mean, I don't know if you can see there's a picture of it there. There's so I did it different colours and things like that. And it just helps me to keep coming back to the question. And when I'm on my own, or when I'm in the small, it gives me something to think about. I can go to a deeper place. And that's about today, really. And it just gives me a focal point, because I might lose it with other stuff, with the daily humdrum. I may lose it, but that just gives me, but I know exactly where it is to find it.
Yes, this I have a strange experience where I have a very large philosophy library that I've obviously developed over the years. It's much larger than it needs to be. It's just I'm what's called a bibliophile, so I love books, actual physical books, and I love well-made books as well, and I have quite a few like interesting, like weirdly bound books and things like this. But one of the things I noticed years ago was that when I was doing some work, when I was maybe writing an essay or writing a course or something, I would be tracking through some of the stuff that I'd read, and I would actually, the books became a kind of like a kind of a depository, and I would know that if I looked through a particular book, somewhere in say the last third of that book on the right hand side was a series of notes that I had made in the text and the margins, and each book has these kind of notes made in them, and they've got little, like, they've lots and lots of them have got little bits of paper stuck in them and folds over and stuff. And so when I need to find something, I kind of vaguely know where it is. It's not like a proper filing system, strictly speaking, but it is this kind of thing. And it was very difficult because I grew up and went into university using those kind of techniques of physical books and physical journals. And so I've transitioned from that into using electronic research media. And there's quite a big difference when I'm using PDFs, for example. You use the search function a lot more and all these kind of things. But that sense of like it being a reference point, I don't know. That sounds interesting. I don't know, Rob. You're nodding. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking it's like a reference point, but it's not set in stone, if that makes sense. So it's like, it's like I'm trying to think of. It's like when like rock climbers hook in somewhere on the cliff, but doesn't mean it's set forever, because like if I write something down and then come back to it in a week, it means something different because of the way I approach it. Sometimes when I reread it back, it doesn't it provokes something else, or it doesn't quite mean what I wrote, what I originally intended. So it's quite it is slippery in a way, but there is a sense of it is a reference point to some degree.
James,
I had the opposite.
Go on, John. I
was just saying, I agree with that entirely. But one bit of writing I have done that has not changed, and I was amazed when I reread it, was my dissertation. Spent a whole year doing it. It's the biggest bit of information I've ever written, and even when I read it now, every line for me is perfectly crafted, even though I've only got a 2-2 for it. But to me, it still said everything I wanted to say in the way I wanted to say it, in the best way I could say it. So I have produced a piece of writing that is the same 30 years later.
It's kind of curious, isn't it? I mean, part of. I mean, I'll come out and be completely, up front. Part of my interest, I suppose, in trying to think about groups working on writing together is, how to describe this? It's as that for me that there are certain characters that come out in text. And so when you read a text, you feel like you're reading an author, and you have this kind of sense of the person speaking. There is somebody there who's saying this. And when we read a novel, we have a bit more. We have a few more of them. And one of the things that Deleuze and Guattari kind of do, and I think really importantly, they try and encourage this sense of thinking of the concepts as part of these characters. And so they talk about this as conceptual persona. But one of the things that I think is and this was referenced at the end of that text last week on joyful militancy, is there are some things that the character who is saying them is neither me nor you, but both of us and more. And there's this kind of character that can only come out in between each of us writing our own pieces. There's a kind of subjectivity here. The joyful militancy book, they say this explicitly. We didn't really talk about this at the end last week, but right at the end of that little extract we read, they say explicitly, that they could not have written this book on their own. Each of them had to be there for that particular book to be written, and it's very easy for us to dismiss that as a kind of practical thing. Oh, they were both helping each other out, they were both filling in the gaps, one's stronger here than there, blah blah blah, as though it's a kind of addition. There's one and they equal one. And in fact, it's like, I think there's something, there's John and there's Jane, and actually what comes out in the end is Frank. And I think that's and that Frank character, that what's interesting about that for me, when you're dealing with texts, is those texts are never really you. They're always some subjectivity talking. They're always some subjectivity talking, partly that you can recognize and partly that you can't. So, when you've been working on a dissertation, maybe for a year, John, you can recognize the subjectivity that was in that space and you can kind of go back to it. Or, as you mentioned, Rob, sometimes you're making notes or you're making a short piece and you go back and you can't quite recognize the subject you were when you were doing that, or who that was. And I think this is kind of one of the interesting things for me is when we think of subjectivity, when we think of human beings in particular, the human beings that exist, or the subjectivities that exist in those texts, I think are kind of they're more than just fictional characters. They're a kind of like an extra layer of people in the world. And they're an extra layer of people in the world that actually have almost more presence sometimes than we do. Because as you mentioned, John, you come back to these things. People come back to these texts. I think this is one of the reasons that certain sort of writing, particularly writing that has this kind of new subject in it, this different voice in it. I think this is one of the reasons some people come back to that so much. And they will return time and time again. For me, one of the things I return to time and time again is that Do Easy piece. I've written. I had a seminar that I did 2 years ago on psychoanalysis, where I was talking to some psychoanalysts, and I was looking at it the other day and realized in that piece I'd actually been writing about Do Easy as well. I'd completely forgotten that so there are certain things that you come back to, because it's like in those texts there is a person that I can't otherwise meet. There's someone there who's not necessarily me, may have been me at a certain point, but there's someone there that's not necessarily me, who I can't meet otherwise. I can't encounter them anywhere else other than through the text. And I think for me that's what interests me in trying to see whether there's a kind of production possibility here, whether there's a kind of subject almost like waiting in the back wings until we let them out. You know what I mean? Something along those kind of lines. Anyway, other thoughts? James, you look questioning and troubled there.
No. No, just yeah. No, I was just listening, really.
That's cool. What's our favourite bit of writing? What's your favourite bit of writing, or one of your favourites? Something that comes to mind. What kind of things come to mind when you think the phrase favourite writing, favourite bit of writing?
I did English literature for A level.
Did what? Sorry.
I did English literature for A level. Coloured sort of some Shakespeare and that kind of thing, which was I really liked.
Do you return to it at all?
I've seen a few plays at like amateur theatre out and about around town and that kind of thing. Rather than actually, when you're reading through it helps to have a teacher to sort of take you through the text, because sometimes it can be quite difficult if you're not familiar with it. I enjoyed some of the philosophy we sort of studied on the Free University too. That was sort of quite your Nietzsche, the geniality of morality, and the Deleuze and Guattari was quite interesting. There've been a few quite interesting courses, and I found that was almost like reading a piece of literature. Sometimes some of it was really sort of quite descriptive, and that was really enjoyable. Yeah.
Anyone else? Favorite text, favorite writing, something like that. What does it bring to mind?
For me, that would be Billy Bragg.
Billy Bragg?
Yeah.
Go on, tell us about that. Tell us about the Billy Bragg.
If you listen to his early stuff when he was, his most militant, the singing's not very good. The guitar playing's just in the background, and he's just talking. But there's something about the lyrics that he manages to paint a picture in one line, more, to me, more than anybody else. Now, I wasn't. I'm a middle class boy who went to a boarding school. You know what I mean? I had nothing in common with what Billy was writing about, but he made me want to listen. He made me want to understand. He made me want to go deeper into what he was talking about, and he did that with not just the catchy lyric, which he did when he was a bit, in the 80s. He was a bit more late 80s. He was a bit more musical, but it was just his lyric. I am the milkman of human kindness, and I'll leave you an extra pint is what I want on my gravestone. And so hopefully I left that's, to me, that just paints a massive picture for me.
Anyone else? For your favourite text, thing that pops to mind. Go on, think of it as a free association. Don't think too hard. Just what comes to mind.
Yeah, I mentioned Ted Hughes earlier. He's someone that I'm going to look up to for the rest of my life, really. He wrote a poem called Wolf Watching, and it's about a wolf in London who's just kind of dying on the street, and it kind of made me think, like, how out of place, like, in the poem he kind of writes about what is he doing there, what made me think was, why would he write a poem about a wolf in London why would Ted Hughes put a wolf in London? And in the poem he writes, that something about, how out of place he is there, and I just kind of like it, because it, how just kind of the kind of oddity of life, really, and how it kind of can just seem a bit, just a bit like random in some ways, like that we kind of just landed on the earth, and we think we have a place on it, we don't really, I don't know, I like the way he uses his words, and they're kind of words that I kind of wish that I could hopefully one day kind of find myself, because they're very strong and unique words that I haven't heard before, and they're kind of really absorbing.
How about you, Rob? Favourite texty kind of things? What kind of things pop to mind?
I think one of that popped to mind was actually I don't read too many novels, but there's one I really love, called Ridley Walker by Russell Hoban, and it's something about, so it's set in a sort of dystopian future, and the sort of the English language has been sort of corrupted in some way, and they've forgotten how to write. So it's written in this, but the person writing it has remembered, like, has learned how to write, but it's written in it's almost like a sort of Germanic kind of that you can just about read it, but it takes you a lot of energy and time to invest into it, and then once you get into the flow of it, it's really quite a profoundly moving novel for me, and quite haunting, and it's definitely one where the characters in that take on their own sort of life, something like that. It's a really magical one.
Yes, that's true. Are you kind of referring to that sense of like loss at the end of a book when the characters have finished and you've stopped and they've gone and they're now over there in the box? I used to have that sensation when I used to read novels. I'd get to the end of a novel that I enjoyed with characters and subjectivities. So I think this is the other thing to think about, is that these are subjectivities that we're thinking of. They're not. Yeah. If we stop thinking of these, or if we think of subjectivities as characters and the same, basically these are the same kind of elements, the same kind of thing. Yeah. So sometimes I'd get to the end of an interesting novel that I was really enjoying or was really beautiful or something, and actually not want to finish it. And there's a couple of times I've actually waited. I mean, I've got one at the moment, The Golden Notebooks by Doris Lessing. The characters in it I really enjoy, and I've actually put it aside for I think it's been a while now, and I've been reading it now for 2 years, and I read the first 2/3 of it in about 2 weeks. But I've actually been reading this text now for about 2 years, 3 years, because I just keep popping back to it and like just refreshing my encounter with the characters, and then maybe reading maybe another 30 or 40 pages and then putting it aside again, because I kind of reminding myself of who the characters are. And I feel like when I get to the end of it, like a lot of times I get to the end of a text, the characters are kind of enclosed again, rather than continually being open as they are before you finish a text. I think I'm interested in us. There's a in chaos magic we have this kind of practice that's called sigil making when we make our spells. And one of the ways we make our spells is we write down a sentence that expresses our intention. So, whatever it is we want to have happen in the spell, and then we carry out a little practice that makes it into what's called a sigil. And this involves, first of all, removing all the vowels from the sentence, and then removing every repetitive letter and just getting a single set of consonants. So TH VP or something, and then you put all of those together into one shape, and you try and make this.
Sorry,
shape.
Matt, could you repeat that? What do? You remove all the vowels and then what?
Oh, I can explain this to you on River if you want in more detail. Because the purpose of doing this, the purpose of going through these processes of like taking a sentence and turning it into a picture, is inside that particular practice to avoid the censor. Okay, so one of the things that is part of that practice of chaos magic is the idea that all of us have a little figure in our head that basically goes, magic is bollocks, magic doesn't work, don't be such an idiot, don't be so foolish, all this kind of stuff. The psychic censor, the censor that says you can't possibly do this because it's wrong. And so in order to try and scoot round them, and for them to not flag up, oh, you're trying to do something that's ridiculous, stop doing that, in order to try and scoot round them, and for you to engage your unconscious and your subconscious, you turn the sentence into an image, and then you try and forget. You try and work on forgetting what that sentence was. And so you just focus on the image, and you constantly try and forget what that sentence was. And you forget the kind of what's sometimes called the lust for result, the idea that you want it to succeed. And you no longer work with this. You now just work with the idea that this particular image is alive, and you're trying to make it alive. You're trying to make it a living kind of thing. So it usually has a name, and there's all sorts of things like that. And I think this is the same when it comes to any kind of encounter with writing. Is that there's a little censor in the background. There's this little figure in the background saying, oh, what are you doing that for? Oh, that's stupid. Oh, that doesn't work. Oh, who wants to read this? Oh, you're being self-indulgent. Oh my God, what the hell? You must be stupid to think that, or whatever. There's this little kind of nagging voice that we've got. In Freudian terms, this is probably our superego. I mean, I don't know. I would say that's probably our superego. In schizoanalytic terms, it's probably something. What would be? I don't know. Where do we get it in the schizoanalytic terms? Probably something like the reterritorialization dynamic that wants you to be back inside the already existing code.
When I wrote my poem this week, I just put the intention there, which was like the dying bumblebee, which was the title, and then I closed my eyes, and then I just visualized the whole poem. So once I kind of visualized it, then I opened it, and then I wrote the poem.
Right, so you've got a technique that's kind of working for you. For a lot of us, those techniques have to be encountered or found as to how you can allow the voice to not be shut down, the words not to be judged or evaluated before you've even put them on a bit of paper. And I think this is what we're going to have to do next. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest actually for our reading for next week is we all bring a little bit of text from one of our favorite texts, something that you enjoy, something that you find interesting, not because it's philosophically interesting, but because the character or the subjectivity that's there is one that you love. Not one you hate. Let's work with joy and love to start with. Let's work with some text or one that you found really useful or interesting. In the case of your little piece there, John, about the 9 the 9 different types of people that you want around you in your group, that might be the kind of thing that's interesting. But yet that I think might enable us to sort of move to the next step, to sort of bring some of our, let's say, our allies, our subjective allies that we encounter in writing into the space, so that they can give us a little bit of warmth and support. So some kind of little bit of text that you can read out from someone that, you know, a character that you love or you have a good relationship with, in some piece of text somewhere, and we'll share those on River, and then we'll read them out with each other, and we'll see what we can kind of encounter with those. And some, you know, obviously it'd be great if we can say something about why we like them as well, or why we have the positive relationship to them, and that I think is gonna, because I think we need to you know, this is, we've done a little bit of, I think, we're theoretical or methodological thought. You know, we've got some activity there to think about in terms of group dynamics, friendship, and flow. And now I think it's just to put our sort of money where our mouth is, and see whether we can actually maybe find some way of allowing a new subject to be expressed through our words. Does that sound like a possibly you know, useful next step? I'm happy to have it.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. Yeah, definitely up for that.
How about you, John? Sound interesting? Up for that? We can talk for the others. They can join in. They'll be fine. I'm sure if we all like to do it, they'll be fine with it.
Yeah.
Well, certainly, because it gives me the week to think about it, and you know what I mean, and then I can get other people's in from that.
Yeah.
So in actual fact, it helps. It brings it round the other way, which is what I want. So in actual fact,
that'll work good for you.
Me, so, yeah.
How about you, James? You okay to do something like that?
Yeah, just like a page or two,
yeah,
or something.
Yeah, something that you find gives you pleasure. Some kind of subject or character that you've read, and you think when you read that, like the Billy Bragg thing, you know, if I'm assuming when John hears that song, it makes him kind of smile inside or something, you know, or have a warm feeling, or a tear comes to his eye, or so. For me, right, that's right, exactly that kind of moment, a moment that when you encounter something in the text that does give you a feeling of something positive. Obviously, there's some texts that just give us that kind of weird. You know, we don't need to deal with Lovecraft or something at the moment. We could just let's start with something that we can enjoy, rather than something that's trying to freak us the fuck out. Helen, does that sound okay with you? You can bring a Ted Hughes poem or anything, or the Wolf, you know, the Wolf in London kind of thing. That would be
yeah.
Work.
I mean,
like that.
I don't know. I was reading Lady Lazarus by Sylvia Plath, and she used the word annihilation. And it really helped me affirm the way that I feel sometimes. So it's not like joy has to be a positive thing. Like no. joy can be something that's kind of relational to kind of like, you know, affirm your own existence, because sometimes feelings are lost and you can't affirm them. So with her piece of writing, it really kind of put a feeling to the way that I was feeling that I couldn't really, you know, have a place for in the world. So I really enjoyed it in that respect, even though the word was annihilation. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that absolutely. I mean, I think we can be relatively wide ranging in our sense of encounter of joy. There, we're thinking of it, you know, that Spinozan sense of joy is a kind of increase rather than a decrease. The only reason I'm thinking of that is if we bring energies in that increase ourselves and make us feel bigger or connected, that's probably a more kind of a more useful thing in this situation, not. You know, but in this situation where we're trying to think about a positive relationship to writing, so trying to learn from things that work for us, as it were, that kind of thing. I think John's connection has slipped away. Well, if everyone's happy with that, I'm going to run the session up to an end, and we're coming up for an hour, so that's good, and we can let others have a listen to that, and we can tell them what's going on. Is there any final little comments or questions before we wind up for the evening? No, we're all good.
What do you want us to do? What do you want us to do with the writings that are posted on River?
In what sense? Which writings are you talking about at the moment? The shared text that we've got up there.
So we each post a piece of What do you want us to write? What we like it, and do we want us to respond to other people's? What do we want us to do?
Oh right, no, we don't need to. You don't need to respond to other people's, although they can. What I'd like us to be able to do is bring it to the session next Monday and be able to read it out. Ideally, that would be the best thing. Is to be able to read it out. So maybe read it through yourself once, and you know, maybe make it not too long so that you don't feel uncomfortable. You know, if it's obviously a 20-minute piece, you might feel like you run out of breath or whatever, and all these kind of things. But it can be as long as you want within reason, I suppose. But yes, so that we read it to each other, and then we'll probably be able to talk about it a little bit, reflect on it in our session, and then we can maybe share them on River. But you can share them beforehand if you want, but I would be inclined to share them afterwards, so that we encounter them first as our voices. That would be my thought. That would be how I think it would work nicely. So we encounter them through our own voices rather than through reading them on the text in the screen sort of thing. Yep. Does that sound all right, James?
Yeah, fine, mate. Definitely.
Okay, well, let's do that then. All right, then. That's everyone. That's 8 o'clock. That's an hour for us this session. And I think as a recap and kind of plan for what we do next, that works for me. And I'll look forward to catching up with you all next week, and we'll bring our favourite voices, or one of our favourite voices, along with us, and see how they sound. Okay, everyone. Have a nice week. Try and rest and enjoy the last bit of summer sun and warmth before it disappears. And, you know, get out there and have a walk if you can, and all that kind of stuff. And I will see you all soon. And thank you very much,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Hey, thanks, mate. Thanks, everyone.
Right, so that's the end of the session today. As I was saying earlier, we're doing a kind of recap and a kind of we're doing philosophy in public, so you're seeing us kind of do our work as we are here. And to remind you that this particular sort of working group is aiming to try and encounter writing. I'm writing about the stuff it's been having a conversation about, particularly following the Freudian schizoanalysis course. So in a sense, I suppose this is a kind of empowering ourselves and disempowering a kind of censor that is engaged in academia, and you know, makes you have to write in a particular kind of way, so you have to fit into a kind of box, and we're trying to sort of find ways around getting out of that, but while still producing something that might be of interest to people, and to ourselves, I suppose. And as I was mentioning in the seminar there, that might also allow new subjectivities to be able to be explored, subjectivities that are beyond just the individual. Hello, John. We were just closing up for the evening. Let me talk to you in a moment. So yes, thank you very much, everybody, and I will catch you again next Monday. And maybe in the meantime, there might be some other little streams kicking around on twitch.tv. So if you have anything you need to do, just give us a follow on Twitch if you can. So thanks very much, and I'll see you next week.